Well, I wanted to talk to you guys about how to design a 48-acre buck magnet. And I'm using a property that I designed in 2013. In fact, it was September 18th, 19th, 20th, right around there. I know that because Diane and I were married on the 21st of September that year, and I had to race home to get married. And so I was working with Anthony, Central Michigan area. And since that time, now you guys could apply this to a 20-acre parcel you have, a 30-acre, an 80-acre, whatever it might be, because the concepts are still the same. It's hard to believe Anthony's gone through 7 hunting seasons since that time. The time flies, it's just crazy. But he's been extremely successful because he worked hard on his plan, because he put the pieces into place. You know, this isn't something that I just keep remaking up every year how I teach clients. These are a set of core founding principles that I originated 12, 14 years ago, and then I've been using these and teaching these ever since. This is actually my 15th season or 16th season, right around there, of property management. I'll hit 1,000 parcels this year, and worked in 26 states. So something I have a lot of experience with, and really it's those core founding principles. I wrote my book in 2012 because I wanted to illustrate and reveal those principles and really discuss them at length. And it really tried to help as many people out there as possible. And I think Anthony's property is a great example of not only how these concepts work, but it's an example of, Anthony's located Central Michigan, high hunting pressure area. Nothing beats Michigan, maybe Pennsylvania for hunting pressure, depending where you're at. But most of this is pretty flat. And so you compare this to other states that have similar hunter numbers, but when you mix in the quality of habitat in the hills and ridges, it makes those properties seem a lot larger than they really are. So truly, when it's a flat parcel, it's about as small as it gets to the deer. And Anthony has had a great example of, not only the concepts working, but what can happen when you really work hard on a plan that's developed the correct way. And I'll talk about some of these core concepts here. And I've been really proud of Anthony. And really had his best hunting season that year. The season opens October 1st in Michigan. So I was working on his property. We actually cut a lot, and when I was there, and cut down a lot of timber over a 2-day period. And then he had a great season just starting October 1st that year, and we'll talk about why. And I'll show you this 40-acre parcel right here. And I'm going to illustrate, this is interesting. This is his drawing is from a long time ago. Many client parcels ago. I've probably drawn 750 to 800 parcels on this tablet. So in tablet years, this is a 2012 tablet. It's got to be over 100 years old in tablet years, but it's still working, and it's my favorite one. I've had a lot of other ones. But I'll use this to illustrate. Anthony's property, square 40, he had, you can see, cover right here, woods, all the way around. And then he had a big field right here. That big field was nothing. There really wasn't anything going on right there at that time. That's that big field right there. Just a big hole in cover. Now he had another hole in cover right here, his southwest hardwoods. That's where he spent a lot of time cutting. And then he had another hole up here. He had a food plot on his east edge. And so from the east, could look right into the property all the way over to his cover here. He had a food plot up there. And then he had a big hole in cover here in an old ag field, and then a big hole in open hardwoods. So really what it boiled down to is instead of 40 acres, he really only had about 20 acres of cover, maybe 22. And then he was accessing this way to hunt. Stands over this way, accessing into stands like this. So you had that really typical parcel where you're accessing through the inside, pushing the deer off, hoping they come back at night. And that's the most typical parcel that I go see. I call it a outside-in parcel because you're waiting for deer to come from the outside in the evening and come onto your land, and you really don't have much of a chance of seeing an older buck during the daylight. And when you mix in big ag on the east side, the north side, the south side, and the west side on Anthony's parcel, he had to wait for deer to come from a long distance away to actually come onto his land. So really the typical nocturnal parcel, no matter how much he did and tried to attract. And in fact, the more attractive you make a parcel like that, the more nocturnal you make that parcel, because you invite more deer from the neighborhood only to spook them off. So a couple of the first steps was to really develop this core area. It was to fill in this area with switchgrass, create a hidden food plot that he could hunt from the outside or from his cabin side on the west side of the road. And the first step, because you couldn't plant that in September, was to knock a lot of this hardwood down. So we spent a good half day of cutting and then opening up those trails. And even though we were putting those hardwoods down in the ground, a lot of them, I would say that 60–70% of the trees in there, and there was no regeneration going in the hunting season, he still had those logs and those tops to actually allow the property to hold wildlife and slow them down, and to actually give the deer some side cover, because it's not about cover over their heads. It's about regeneration, logs, tops, and a little bit of hills if you have them, for side cover so deer can actually move through that area. So if they're coming from across the road from the west, they come onto the land, they can actually stop, and instead of having to run all the way through to get to this thick autumn olive, grassy area with small hardwoods, thorny apples, some apples, and to get to this area. So once that was cut and thick, now he's extending that cover all the way to the road. So you could actually hunt down, and I believe the first buck he shot in 2013 was out of this stand right here by the road, or at least the next year. He shot one right down here too. So the first step was getting those hardwoods down so we can get rid of that whole cover. And the next step was this plant switchgrass here, which Anthony's a master at that. I've actually learned a lot from him for frost seeding and his recipe for success. I give him credit all the time for that. And he planted that. Now he's got a thick switchgrass stands. We have pictures of Anthony where he's about 6 foot, a little over 6 foot, and that grass is up to his head level just within the second year. Filling this edge here, this east edge, to hide from switchgrass. Now he's got a complete property as far as how the deer feel safe from corner to corner, side to side. And a buck could actually feel safe on the property, moving anywhere on the property during the daylight. And now you can actually start to hold some deer. But it wasn't just that. It's once you have that complete and you hide those food plots in locations where you can actually get around them on your property. And it was a matter of Anthony developing this south axis, his north axis, so that he could actually get around the property and not really infringe on that core area in the middle. So what I like to refer to as an efficiency of parcel. Anthony was able to take a 40-acre parcel that had 0 acres where deer wouldn't see, hear, or smell a hunter when they hunted on that property. And there's 2 of them mostly hunt on the property, Anthony and his father. So when they hunt that land, there wasn't one area on that property where any acres that a deer couldn't see them, hear them, or smell them, and therefore there's no sanctuary. And food plots are just as important, even more important than a bedding area to be included in that sanctuary. So after this design, filling in this field area, the southwest woods, then if you draw a white line around the stand location areas where you have to access to, those yellow lines are travel corridors, the green are food plots, blue waterhole, yellow switchgrass, the orange pockets, deer bedding, the brown area is opening up because some of it's too thick. But now you take this right here, you draw a white line around those stand locations, and this is that area on the inside where Anthony is not infringing on when he goes into that property. He's always blowing his scent, sight, and sound. He's keeping that outside of the property. So when he comes to this stand, everything's out. So then that gave him, if you look at that, I would guess that out of 40 acres, he was devoting at least 75% of his land to all deer all the time. And that's what I try to take clients from. Doesn't matter what size of property, but at least 50 to 60% of your land should always be some type of core. Now you might have 160, so that you're getting 50 acres on one side of the road, 70 acres on the other, maybe one side of your driveway, one side of the other. You're still getting 120 acres out of 160. You get that 75%. It's easier to get a higher percentage on a big parcel because that takes into the same amount of access width that you need along your borders. You still need 30, 40 yards that you can access and not spook deer along a border. So that gave Anthony that 75%. At that point, the table is then set. Depending on how you hunt that land, the quality level, the features on the land don't make as much impact. So obviously you have to have thick cover. You have to be able to access the land without spooking deer. But bottom line, when you're done with a 40-acre parcel like that and you devote 28 acres, 32 acres, in the case of Anthony, probably 30 to 32 acres right around there, to all deer all the time, that's when the power of a small parcel heats up extremely well. You know, Before, again, the accessing right here to go to a stand. Accessing that same road to go to a stand. Accessing that same road to go to a stand over here. Down to here. Accessing through here to go to a stand. You can see they had a shooting blind over here. There's no area on that entire property then where you could devote to all deer all the time, and that is the majority of parcels I see. When you actually take into account and you create that high percentage of land efficiency for a small parcel, that's when the value of a small acreage really heats up, because most lands that I see that are 80, 120 acres, 200 acres, people say, well, I can't compete with the big properties. Still goes back to the same thing. Maybe they have 5 acres on that land where they never infringe on because of some corner swamp, and they keeps them from accessing through there. But that 5 acres doesn't relate to their food plots or their quality bedding areas. So that 5 acres really can't be included in that percentage of efficiency because it doesn't even relate to their land. I can't tell you how many properties I go to that have 80, 100, 120 acres, 200 acres, and there are 0 acres that are devoted to all deer all the time. So when you find an area, when you find 30 acres in the neighborhood, when you find 20 acres in the neighborhood that have high quality food plots, high quality bedding, when you have cover where deer can go side to side and move throughout the entire property, then you actually have a high quality deer parcel. Anthony is a perfect example. You know, again, this is going back to 2013. I've been preaching and teaching these same concepts since then. You can see one of those concepts, perpendicular access, where if you're coming into that stand in red right there, the line of movement is right here of deer. So you're accessing perpendicular to that line of movement. This is a daylight stand. This means that here's a food plot flowing through here. You come into this stand from the east to get into this stand. You go into that stand about a half hour after daylight. You sit back here, wait for that field to clear of deer. You go right into and you go perpendicular to that stand. The deer movement for cruising bucks during the daytime is right here. Use a lot of daylight access like that into a stand that way. All these stands, perpendicular to the line of deer movement. That's something I developed a long time ago, and that makes it so you're not accessing an angle, exposing yourself to that access. Habitat features that parallel the land in the line of movement within that. So your habitat features are paralleling your property borders. You're not trying to shoot deer off of your property borders. You're trying to keep them inside your borders. You actually have curves and easy transition so that deer can move around your borders without spooking them. It's not that deer are just going to complete a big wheel of movement, but it's if deer are going to move on your land, they're going to move parallel to your borders. The concept of efficiency of acres, making sure that you have at least 50% of your land devoted to all deer all the time, and Anthony has that. And then hunting it correctly, making sure that you're making smart decisions on when to actually hunt, making sure that you're using the most ideal days to hunt, the best weather days, which I teach on this channel. Also, you have stands, like in the case of Anthony's, where you have morning stands back here, away from food, and in interior areas. And then you have evening stands that are more food related, closer to food, and you're hunting deer that are bedded somewhere, and then you're hunting them on their way out to food. And then you have a stand like this. This is a late morning entrance. There isn't one set time that you should be entering your stands. If your downwind's going to blow into deer before daylight, then you probably should get there right there in gray light or just before shooting hours so you don't blow out your hunt 45 minutes before daylight. There's no set time to enter a stand. Now, if your downwind is covered before daylight, then you get in there as early as you want, and that's what I like to do, at least an hour before. If you need that gray light for entrance and there's a possibility of blowing deer out before you get in, meaning that they access downwind of you in a non-deer area that they wouldn't be there during the daylight, then get there right before daylight and access that stand. And then in the case in Anthony's, like this stand right here, that's where you're waiting for the deer to clear out of that food plot, and then you're going right to it to capture cruising bucks on the inside edge of that cover. That happens to be all autumn olive right there, very thick, and apples. And Anthony can just make a small trail through there. They're already using it. It's on a ledge. It drops down, and a great way to access that stand. So I wanted to show you that example of Anthony. I keep in touch with a lot of my clients throughout the years. He's one of those I encourage my clients to text. I'd rather hear from them 10 times over 6 months than 10 times all at once. Phone calls are tough because I'm on the road for 2 weeks at a time. So those quick texts are awesome. I don't have time to go through 10 question list either, because I'll have clients that are, 7 clients are asking one question. I'll go through those first. And some of those long questions, that goes for YouTube, everything else. If they're short, concise questions, I get to those first. I often skip through, like on YouTube comments, and answer those quick ones. And those 3-paragraph questions with multiple questions within those 3 paragraphs, I might not even have time to look at those. So if you can keep your questions short, then I like to answer those questions. The same with clients. I want to keep in touch with them for a long time. Anthony's a great example of not only what it takes to build a parcel and do it right, and with the concepts that I've been teaching for a long time that are in my books as well, but also what it means to see an example of hard work being rewarded. I believe during that time, I don't know if Anthony shot 14 bucks during that 7-year span of hunting, but I know he's at least shot 10 to 12. I remember his daughter got a chance on a 140, 150-inch 10-point during the youth season a couple years ago. Anthony's age class has been going up to where he's actually really tapping into those 3-4-year-old bucks. And this is high-pressure Michigan, let alone if you actually take these practices and apply them to some of the lower pressure states where you have older bucks in the age structure. It just shows what can be done with limited resources, let alone if you're in another state where you have really good resources as far as low hunting pressure, attractiveness, low hunting pressure, big woods, big parcels, and already an older age class of bucks. Hope you enjoyed this description. I'm going to try to bring some of these more to you this year. And this has been a great property. I love keeping track of Anthony, and I love those texts I get from him, you can imagine, during hunting season, and showing yet another great buck that he shot in a high pressure area of Michigan.